It looks like you'll need to reshare, Avery. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Aliso Creek Watershed Collaboration Group meeting. This is a continuation of a discussion we started last month, and we're hoping to explore this topic in a little bit more detail this morning. I want to start off by just a little bit about housekeeping, and hopefully we'll get this all correct. This is we were just talking this morning about all the different platforms we're all using between Zoom and GoTo and Microsoft Teams, etc. So first of all, just some brief introductions. The way we're going to do this, the next slide we'll talk about introducing yourself in chat, your name and your organization. We actually have the participant list. You should be able to see the attendees and their names. If you'd like to confirm, maybe you're calling in and you're on a telephone number and you'd like to actually enter your name or somehow, that's going to be a little bit difficult for you to do that on a phone. So there might be a way that you can clarify things by Q&A, or absolutely, if you're going to ask a question and come on, we'll want you to introduce yourself so that we know who's speaking. Okay, so next slide. So this morning we have several meeting objectives and roles. The main one is that we want to recap the conclusions from the Aliso Creek Restoration Survey, which we started in our meeting last month. We got pretty far, but we had lots of great questions, and I think that today we have time to explore those in even more detail with Bespoke. Then we want to talk about the next potential steps for the Aliso Creek concept restoration development. How will we proceed from here? And if we've got time, we're going to present some guidance for the rest of the stakeholders of this group on how you bring forward your conceptual designs. And hopefully this process that we've done the last meeting and this meeting has given you an idea of how you can present your particular project and some of the steps that you can follow. But we'll go into those a little bit more detail towards the end of the meeting. And then if we've got time, we'll introduce some potential opportunities coming up in the funding area. As always, with all of our meetings, we have some common rules for all participants. We want to focus on the group objectives and moving forward and making sure that we actually solve some of the issues that we're addressing. We want to listen with an open mind. So think about a little bit out of the box sometimes. Think about how maybe your particular project can dovetail with this particular project. And then, as always, attack the problem that we're facing and not an individual. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're already 5 minutes in. We're going to start with Bespoke. This is George Kelly and David Biddlesbach. We'll take on the recapping from the May meeting and our potential next steps. George and David.
Good morning, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to come back and really dig into this in a lot more detail. So we're hopeful to have a lot more discussion, and our intent here today is to maybe revisit what we did on March 25th, talk a little bit about that in a summary format, and then ultimately talk a lot about the next steps, and then look for your questions. Before we do that, next slide, we thought it was important to maybe take a step back a little bit to give you kind of some detailed inputs about David's and my experience. And I think it's important to kind of understand where we're coming from in relative to that. But having participated in delivering over 250 miles of stream restoration in 10 states, I think one of the most important things that I have learned is this notion of what is the goal, the ultimate goals. And I know we've had some desired outcomes here, but I just wanted to make clear, to me, that's not us determining that. That's going to be this group. And we have done stream restoration in so many different contexts, and the designs often follow those contexts. So whether it's a public grant fund program that's focused on habitat versus a scenario of stream mitigation in the 404 process or in the MS4 permitting realm, our designs have taken some unique looks. But the point being that streams have been used in all of those contexts. And to the extent you can integrate, even better. And so one of the things that we also like is to integrate, particularly when you're talking about hydration, floodplain connectivity, and wetlands associated with those floodplains, species, and the nutrient reduction projects as well. That's another key, but again, that's going to be driven by the stakeholders and the desired goals. Another big point, and I think it was raised in some of the questions about, we've worked in all kinds of contexts, and you're going to hear more about Dave, about his technical experience. But, we understand this is an urban context. We've worked in the rural, we worked in the suburban. That's another big point here relative to the design. Finally, when you talk about the design approaches, we're agnostic. And, so a lot of people come at it in different approaches, but whether it's natural channel design, zero stage, legacy sediment, bank stabilization, floodplain connectivity, we've done it all. But normally those designs follow, again, the desired outcomes. And I think that's the message I want to send to you. We know this is a large scale project. Both Dave and I have been involved with a lot of large scale projects with, and just to give you a flavor, I've been involved with a 40-mile and a 70-mile stream restoration project, dealing with issues like phasing, overall permitting, master planning, and the like. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to give you a little bit more on his technical backdrop as well.
All right. Yeah, my name is Dave Bottlesbach. I've been working with George for a number of years, and I have about 20 years in the industry. We've been blessed to work on about 400 stream and wetland restoration projects. About 100 of them have been in urban stream systems. About 25 have been coastal and tidal projects, and we've had 10 projects that we've worked on in California.
Did we lose you?
Looks like we've lost
Dave?
David, can you hear us? I think
We can move on to the next
he's
slide.
there. Let me take the opportunity since, and hopefully David will be able to jump back in. For those people that have questions, you can type your question directly into Q&A. Jenna will be managing that, Andrew on the other end. You may also raise your hand, and to find your raise hand, it's in the participant list. You will be able to see, there should be a little hand somewhere located where you can select that, and then we'll try to pay attention to those individuals, and then you can we'll unmute you and you can ask your question in person. If you're on the phone, I understand it's a *3 that allows you to raise and lower your hand, and then we'll be able to unmute you. Are you hopefully that gave Dave time to come back, unless he
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry if I get a little break, I might just go on my phone instead. My internet seems questionable where I'm at right now.
Thanks, Dave.
Sorry. So
I think I might have him call in by phone.
I think we should go ahead and do that. And George, maybe you can move to the next slide and take over, or if you'd like me to, I can also fill in.
Yeah, Dave, he's coming right now.
Okay.
I think Aaron, you might be good to be talking about some of the, the backdrop in terms of our understanding of the existing project. On the next slide, you might be a good person to talk
Yeah,
about.
I can backfill for Dave on this while he gets his connection back. So there have been some questions. Certainly, a great question is, how does this continue? What can this borrow from the core, all the core evaluations that were done? That is a starting point for the work, and it certainly forms a great backdrop. Some of it is rather old. Some of it does need to be updated. So the context for this work that we're presenting today is to build on that work, build on the desired outcomes. Dave and and George collected some minor new data. It was a couple, a few days of field assessment, being out there in the system, which you heard about last time, to collect some additional information about vegetation, bankful characteristics that help form the new design basis around a mini regional curve. And so, the basic core of what has been discussed last time and will be discussed again is that mini regional curve and how that serves as a different, alternative design basis for establishing the size of the channel and hopefully, finding something that better aligns with the desired outcomes of the group for this system. So that's a real nutshell of the project context. And certainly as this moves forward, we'll show a roadmap for how this would potentially then go into a master plan and move towards a permitting and environmental review process. And at that point in time, there would be a focused evaluation of what elements of the core studies can be carried forward and what needs to be updated or what needs to be, wholly revised to support that process. But we're a little ways off from that. We'll come back to that topic a little later in the presentation, what we see that roadmap to be.
And Dave just sent me something. Darren, does anybody have the call-in number specific? He can't seem to find that.
We have it. Let me send it to Mrs. Dan.
All right, Avery, why don't we keep moving?
So
do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, and I think I think one of the points and questions raised was the experience in the contextual scenario that we're in, and Dave has, Dave is the technical lead on a lot of our projects and has worked actively in these kind of aerodynamics. We recognize, obviously, this is a scenario where there's also what we call the urban drool associated with some of the flow regimes out there, but in general, very familiar with that. The four-tier concept is something that has been looked at as well in the urban context, as Dave put forward on this slide. He's been involved in implementing those in about 6 states. And so the key here again is the resilience and anticipating flow changes, flow regimes, in that particular landscape as well.
All right, do we have Dave?
Dan, did you send the number?
He did.
I did. I see a new call user. I'm gonna wait for his confirmation.
I think the point on obviously the conceptual design flow here is, one, as Aaron mentioned, we know there's been 15 years of work and looking at what's going on, and what we are doing is taking a fresh look through survey methodologies to establish these mini regional curves, which is the basis for a lot of the design work that Dave has done over the years. And I think that's one of the key points you're going to hear about again in our summary, in terms of what that results have led to and what the size of our restoration and what is our approach. When we talk about the multi-criteria decision analysis, we're really talking about evaluating those potential options for each reach in a context of multiple criteria, including cost and types of design, permitting, et cetera. And so that leads ultimately to kind of an alternative for concept design. But in order to get to that formal alternative for a concept design, you're going to see these bullets on the right that suggest what we've done is very preliminary. It's only at concept stage. And we need to take it further relative to doing more analysis relative to geomorphic assessments, stream flow, predictive levels, regulatory, construction phasing, funding and grant opportunities, and then obviously mitigation analysis to the extent that's a consideration. So that's the flow, the typical flow, and we're at this concept. We want to reaffirm today that we're really at the concept level at this stage. Hold on, Dave just, he can hear me. Dave, can you now plug in?
If you've called in on the phone, can you hit *3 for me, please?
Okay. I think to keep things going, Aaron, do you mind taking over from here? And then when we get the things worked out with Dave, he can jump in.
Yep.
Is that Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yes, we can.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. All right. Now I should be fine. I'm on my phone. I should be able to keep cell signal. So sorry about that.
Go ahead. We were just looking at the slide number 5, conceptual design, talking about pre-master plan.
All right.
Hopefully that
Yeah.
orientates you.
So, yep, I got you. So, yeah. So what we've been at so far is trying to look at where the size of the channel and the size of the channel as it'd be related to any kind of restoration or establishment of vegetation related to a restoration design. And that really is in the level of a pre-master plan and document opposed to really even being at a master plan level. So what we looked at with these preliminary ideas was to establish this mini regional curve, which we had discussed last time, and we can continue to discuss if there's questions, and just collect enough information to be able to establish what restoration could look like with some preliminary ideas. So the next phase would be going to the master plan. That would be a 10% concept design. With that master plan, we'd want to look at the geomorphic assessment in a little bit more detail, kind of look at a predictive level assessment. So we've come up with some real rough ideas of how stable or how unstable we think the Aliso Creek is, and we want to look at what the prediction would be for that instability or that stability. So we'll get better, we'll get worse over time. Also be able to tie in regulatory analysis to figure out, okay, well, what does it look like with both California and federal permitting opportunities to be able to get this project done, and where can grants come in, where can we find funding opportunities, and also is there mitigation potential associated with this? And all these things go into that master plan document. It's not much undifferent than a master plan document in a community where you look at drainage or you look at what happens if we want to do more parks in the area. How do we build a master plan to figure out what new park potential there is in a community? We're just looking at this master plan with an emphasis on the stream function, stability, and process. After the master plan process, we would move on to 30% design. That would help us to be able to communicate that 10% concept design in more detail and try to figure out what is more optimal for the design from what was feasible in the 10% design. And then we move on to 60, 90, and 100% design phase before we go to construction activities. This is the master plan generally could have all of the reaches involved, and it would create a prioritization for the reaches. So we'd look at it and say, okay, well,
what reaches do we really want to work on first, and then we would move to that 30, 60, 90% design based on the reaches that we have prioritized as being the most important reaches to start on. So if we can move to the next slide, which the next slide is mini regional curve. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we developed the mini regional curve based on our idea of looking at cross sections that were quasi-stable. What quasi-stable means is that it's not really completely stable. These are still impaired reaches, but they've had enough time for deposition of sediment to establish and allow for the establishment of riparian vegetation at different levels along the creek. So it assumes that some of these segments are adjusted to the current flow regimes, and that includes the increase of the magnitude of the small storms, as well as the duration related to low flow conditions and the flashiness of these watersheds and how these watersheds adjust with the current flow regimes from the urbanization and the amount of development upstream. We also look at geomorphic stability and how that allows the natural sediment dynamics and variability in plan and vertical profile over time. So what we're trying to figure out is, okay, well, we have this this idea of how big a channel needs to be. Well, are these streams going to continue to be stable, or are they going to get worse in time? Or are they going to get better in time? And how will that change? A lot of times we look at restoration and say we don't really restore streams. We put them back on the trajectory of restoration, and then in time, they will become restored ecosystems. We use the mini regional curve as an initial estimate for bankful dimensions. This gets us in the right ballpark. It can't be used for final design. When we get to 30, 60% design, we have to look at different methods, but we're generally within the right ballpark for this. And what that means is very rarely do we have a channel dimension that is more than about 20% off one direction or another when we're doing these mini regional curves for that bankful dimension. And then primarily, this relates back to the function of small storm events. So basically storm events that happen every year, multiple times a year, maybe up to a storm event that may happen every 2 years. But this does not, these mini regional curves does not predict the discharge of a 100-year discharge channel. So I think I'm on the slide right now, 4-stage urban channel design. I'm in a wilderness area right now where I thought I had better cell phone connection than I did. So can somebody verify that I'm on 4-stage channel design slide?
You are correct, Dave.
So the 4-stage channel design, what we start out is knowing that any kind of applied discharge to these cross sections or towards this natural stream is going to have to take whatever is being produced by the watershed. So if we have urbanization that produces a very high 100-year discharge, we have to make sure that it can be dispersed over the cross section in a way that's not going to cause excess erosion or allow for excess deposition and aggradation of the floodplain, which then could lead to changes of the regulatory floodway as well. So we look at that, and that's kind of our highest channel, our 100-year discharge channel. Our next channel down is what we call flood terrace channel, and this is a terrace that can be between a 1.5 to 3-year storm event. So when the Corps of Engineers put together a lot of their designs, they looked at about a 2-year storm event, and this is generally what we see in this flood terrace channel. It's a little bit bigger channel. At the top of the flood terrace channels, we generally see kind of more woody vegetation that's showing up opposed to the willows that are down at the lower elevations. And then we end up seeing from the next channel that we see in this 4-stage urban channel design is what we get from the mini regional curve. And this is basically where we see the most frequent large storms occur. And so this is the size of the channel that tends to be showing evidence of doing the most amount of work over time. This is how we want to base our design. We want to make sure that the depths of this channel are not too deep so that we don't prohibit vegetation from establishing on these benches. And then the final one is an ecological channel, which is really a low flow channel to take some stress off of the side slopes of the banks and also provide some improvement for aquatic habitat in these systems. So it creates a narrow system where we can allow for aquatic organisms to live. The next slide we'll go to is slide number 10. And I want to compare kind of the difference between the FourStage channel design and what the Corps of Engineers had for their feasibility study. And options 2 and 3 of the feasibility study were very useful to use as part of our design. And we didn't completely understand the study, and we didn't know the ins and outs of the study, but we were able to understand kind of the general ideas of the study. So we have 4 tiers instead of the Army Corps of Engineers was predicting 2 tiers. And you can see the picture that we have is existing conditions. You can see that there's 3 tiers or 4 tiers in that existing condition. You can't see the 4th tier because it's a higher elevation than where we're sitting, but you can see these multiple benches that are in that picture. There's a bank full depth. Our design for a bank full depth is 2.4 feet, whereas the bank full depth for the design by the Army Corps of Engineers was 4 feet. The lowest bank full elevation that we see, so this is the lowest bench elevation, is 1.6 feet. And that's important because that 1.6 feet means that at that lowest bench, we have 1.6 feet until we get to the base flow water surface elevation at drought. So if we want vegetation to establish and these plants don't have a 4-foot root depth, they're gonna die during the drought season. So for us, it's really important that that lowest bench has a place for vegetation to establish, just like if you think of it as terraced agriculture approach, you wanna make a flat bench where water can get to the roots of these crops so that they can grow. And that's kind of what we're looking at in the stream too. So the lower the bench, the flatter the bench, the better. And that lowest bench that we have, that interberm bench, is at 1.6 feet compared to the lowest bench at the Corps of Engineers design was 4 feet, which just means it's going to be a lot harder to get vegetation initially established with a depth of 4 feet on that bench, because the roots are going to have to be almost 2 to 4 times deeper before they can withstand a drought period. And then the final one is really one of the biggest difference on here. We have the low flow channels being a 30-foot wide channel, and it's a small cross-sectional area, and the Corps of Engineers had a 100-foot wide channel. So just from that idea of how wide the channel is, that changes the areas of disturbance. It changes how we can grade up to the existing ground. The side slopes have to be fairly similar. You know, we're all, you know, what we were saying is 4 to 1 side slopes wherever possible. Corps of Engineers was saying 3 to 1 side slopes. So we may do some areas of 3 to 1 side slopes, but when you take 100 foot out of the corridor width, it's a lot harder to hit those higher elevations with that 3 to 1 side slope than when you have 30 feet, which can fit into the landscape better. We're going to move on to slide number 11 now.
Just before you do, Dave, I just want to kind of come back to, you described earlier your next steps to bring this to more of a master plan design that would have a better level of confirmation of the dimensions. And that would involve some evaluation of shear stresses and how they're distributed, if I understand correctly. And I mean, before you answer, I guess I just want to compare and contrast it. You know, any hydraulic evaluation where you start to look at that's going to have some starting assumptions about, you know, how you set your depths and your widths and stuff. You're not going to evaluate all potential combinations of channel tiers, depths, and widths. And so, yes, you know, you know, when you look at shear stresses only and look at what, you know, what's going to be erosive or scour potential, certainly the Corps design evaluated that and concluded that it wasn't, you know, that it was going to be resistive. But I guess the point to comment on, Dave, is that that same evaluation would be done. It's just going to be done with some different starting assumptions in terms of, you know, how to configure the tiers and the dimensions. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So we generally start with a shear stress analysis on all 4 tiers. And we actually have done that in concept design, but the exact discharges that we use may have had assumptions that are old, out of date, and also we look at it from a steady state standpoint. So if we have a quick increase of discharge or decrease of discharge, we will see a difference in shear stress evaluation that has not been evaluated at this point yet. But we do look at that overall width of the channel as it's related to the shear stress, but there has to be a lot more detail placed on that in the next phases of the design. The other thing that we do in the next phase of the design is when we say, hey, this is a priority for this restoration reach, and we want to design it with this channel dimension, then we would have to move to multi-dimensional modeling as well, whether it be something like HECRAS that has a 2D model on it, or if it's FESWIMS that has a 2D model, or if we even go to something like a Flow 3D that has a 3-dimensional hydraulic modeling program, then we look at it and see, okay, where are there hot spots for shear stress that don't show up in the one-dimensional design process that we've done before. But we most definitely have to look at the shear stress both from a 1D standpoint on all 4 of those stages, and then we'll run hydraulic geometry by stages in 1D across that cross section to look at peaks of shear stresses, and that will look at for a whole range of discharges, and then we'd want to take it into 2D or 3D modeling after that.
Thanks for expanding on that.
Before we proceed, Aaron, unless you've got another question, I just wanted to check in with Jenna to see, I think we might have a couple questions from the participants. Jenna?
We do. We have a couple questions. I'm going to start with the ones that are applicable to this slide. We had kind of an overarching question that we may come back to. This first question is from Susan Brodeur. What is the bottom elevation on your section compared to the Army Corps of Engineers 0?
Yeah, so both of these are typical cross sections. In general, we're looking at slightly raising up the bed of the channel. So if just from an example here, our starting elevation would be somewhere closer to maybe 2 feet in elevation. It's going to be a slight raise of the bed, but not a significant raise in the bed, whereas the Army Corps of Engineers would be at the existing ground elevation as it is right now. And that would change based on profile throughout every reach, and there'd be some differences on it, but our general concept is that we'll slightly raise the bed of the channel, opposed to the Army Corps of Engineers was saying we weren't going to raise the bed of the channel.
Yeah.
I hope that helps, Susan.
I think the answer on the core, definitely varies by reach. In some reaches, they're going to start with the existing grade, and in others that were highly incised, they were going to need to bring in a lot of fill to raise the bed. So I don't think there's one answer that fits it all. I think your answer about what you're proposing is probably more resilient and moving forward in the sense that you're talking about potentially raising a couple feet in some areas to reconnect that lowest bench.
And then we have a question from Mike Beenan. He said we need to distinguish between a stream and a creek discharging to state marine protected area. Has 5 Smooth Stones worked on creeks discharging to coastal wetlands and MPAs?
We have before the MPA. We've had things that were kind of the same in different areas. The exact idea of the MPA may not be something that I've worked on before. I'm not exactly sure what it entails in MPA, what all the regulatory ideas of it are. So.
I guess
Okay.
I guess I just wanted to expand on that and potentially, Mike, if you want to unmute yourself, and expand on this a bit. I think the stream functions we're trying to work towards are a resilient functional system that continues to move some sediment, reduces excess sediment export from the system, which has been happening for years, and restores some of the more natural processes of nutrient assimilation and other functions that you expect out of a system after it has a more natural function. So I think the big picture is that this works towards many of the goals that apply to the wetland, the estuary, and the coastal restoration efforts. The idea of the low flow channel allows this to be resilient to a reduced flow regime in the future, something that has been shown, looked at and likely is desirable for the estuary, as to some reduction in freshwater inflow. And this design would be compatible with the idea of bracing for additional drought, bracing for, or being supportive of water conservation efforts. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which this is very compatible with those downstream systems that all sort of work as a system. But I do also want to offer a chance for you to unmute and expand on this if you want, as to specific things that you have in mind.
Steven, unmuted.
Yeah, hi. Am I coming through?
You are.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for letting me comment on this. I think a lot of times these restoration projects are looking at a certain segment of stream area that may be inland or towards the headwaters. And Aliso is probably unique among many creeks versus streams, in that there's a big movement to get the estuary restored, which is at the mouth of the creek. So the behavior of the creek is key to restoring the Aliso estuary. And to that end, the flow levels are critical. If there's too much water in the creek, it'll blow out the sand berm and not allow the estuary to be restored. If there's too little water, of course, it'll dry up the area. So I think it's imperative that we bring everyone up to speed on the importance of restoring the coastal wetlands. Over 90% of them have been lost in California. So the Aliso restoration is a priority for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and really the community. The city of Laguna has put money into it. I believe the county has as well. So thanks for letting me comment on that.
Yeah, and Mike, I've been incredibly blessed to work with the Mobile Bay Estuary Program in the past. And we've done a lot of 3D modeling on these stream restoration projects with the exact, with parallel ideas of what we're trying to do. Is really, it's the wetland restoration at the estuary that we're concerned about, and the amount of flows. So we are familiar with the concepts. I'm not familiar with the with what exactly is going to be involved with regulatory aspects, but we are open to learning. So,
well, perhaps a subsequent meeting down at the Aliso Beach area would be useful in the future.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Mike, if it's okay, I'd like to go to your second question later on in the presentation. That's kind of an overarching question about the creek restoration as a whole. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And that's what I have for right now, Darren.
Great, thanks, Janet. Go ahead, Dave, with your next slide.
All right, we'll move to slide number 11. And I'm saying that I just don't have, I have the slides in front of me. I don't have a connection on my computer, so I can go through the slides. So as we had mentioned before, what we're talking about right now is a concept design. This really is a preliminary idea, even pre-master plan ideas of what could be done. And we laid out all these plans based on the concept of, hey, how big does the bank full channel need to be? And if the bank full channel is this big, what does that mean to the rest of the dimension pattern profile of the channel within this reach? And how could that be laid out In some places, it doesn't really need to be adjusted much. Other places, you have a higher degree of incision, and there's value in reconnecting to a higher floodplain surface from a former period. So the idea of picking up the channel and putting new pattern on it makes a lot of sense, so that you have more distribution of energy during high flows. And so that's kind of where we came up. That's kind of where we came up with these initial preliminary design ideas in the pre-master plan. We didn't sit down with stakeholder groups and say, hey, this is what the most important goals and objectives are. This is how we need to look at the goals and objectives related to each reach. And this is what we may want to do based on these goals and objectives. We just started out with a really rough MCDA and said, hey, this is kind of how we would approach this in the future, opposed to approaching at that level. What we're really trying to get at is, can we have a significantly smaller channel out there, and can that be stable from a geomorphic standpoint? And if so, what would the areas of disturbance look like if we were going to go to a 4-stage channel design? So one of the things that you see here is a limit to disturbance, and that was really meant to be kind of one of the big take-home pieces of data on these concept designs. Is this is about how much area we would need to have if we wanted to do this 4-stage channel restoration based on this smaller geomorphic channel. And the concept, or the preliminary concept here, is if that's just way too much area, then there may have to be a different type of design that's proposed other than this 4-stage channel design. If it looks like something that may be too much, but there's opportunities that we could optimize it and minimize the amount of limits to disturbance, then maybe we move forward with an idea like this. If it's something that is significantly less and it's reasonable, then it just kind of gives us a green light to move forward completely with it. So that's the limits to disturbance is the big thing we wanted to lay out to you with these preliminary designs. We have a lot of different ways that we could lay out a preliminary design for these reaches, and a lot of different ways that will work. But that doesn't mean they're all going to be beneficial. It doesn't mean that they're all going to be meet the same goals and objectives of the project as laid out by stakeholders as what another design would reach. So they're all going to have different boundary conditions and different ideas of how do we achieve these goals and objectives based on the boundary conditions of the individuals that are assessing the goals and objectives of the project. Now, the overall physical boundary conditions won't change near as much as kind of how our opinion of look at as being successful in this reach would be. So that's kind of what we look at in the concept design. We'll move forward to slide number 12 now, if possible. Do we have any questions on slide 11?
Yeah, I think we had a question, Jenna,
Yeah.
from Josie.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So from Josie Bennett, any thoughts on how arunda removal past and future will impact these plans? Is the current expression of the creek considered stable after large-scale arunda removal efforts? We have seen dramatic changes since removal in the area in which we are working.
And I think more.
I will give my thoughts, and then I'll let somebody else add a little bit more on it. I do think that the removal of any vegetation that's holding the banks in place is going to cause at least a temporary instability. And with the vast quantities of vegetation that will be removed, we will have at least temporary instabilities from that. And with the degree of incision on the site, we don't expect that will stabilize until we get a little bit more width of the flood flows through there. So there's going to have to be some more lateral migration associated with that. So I do expect with removal of any vegetation that we would have instabilities that will occur.
I guess I want to challenge that a bit, Dave, in the sense that what Arundo has done in the past is channelize flows considerably, and removing it has potentially, in some cases, I think this is what Josie and her team have seen, is that it allows water to spread a little bit more in a more natural way and removes those sort of very unnatural clumps, clumping of vegetation that's pretty uncommon in native. It really just doesn't exist in native willow or grass, but this clumping arundo. So I think maybe to clarify that, and maybe you didn't visit any segments when you were out there that had a lot of arundo existing, because so much of it has already been removed, to be able to see the before and after. But have you worked with
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask, to add some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have worked with it and worked on the removal as well. And what I was really thinking about was related to the arundo right on the near bank regions. But I agree with you. Whenever we're talking about arundo that grows in the middle of the channel and basically pushes and splits flows on either side one way or the other, it can actually encourage bank migration as well. So I understand what you're saying there. My experience with arundo is not as high as what many people on the team's experience would be. And when I walk the stream, I can remember seeing areas of it, but I don't think that I completely appreciated kind of the complexity of the removal of that vegetation.
So I think, to expand on the answer to your question, Josie, I think it's a good step, and I think we need to be, and I think more broadly, you've through your efforts developed some better habitat mapping, vegetation mapping that reflects the removal of arundo, reflects some of the current conditions of that, and I think that's one of those things that Dave was mentioning in his previous narrative about additional information that would help guide where where impacts would be could be minimized, how you could avoid areas of high value vegetation and focus any efforts in areas where the value is lower. So just to expand on the response, Josie, I think that updated vegetation information would be critical. I can't comment specifically on whether that alone will cause a segment to become stable, or whether that combined with some minor grading that Dave's described would be needed.
Aaron, the only thing that I would add also is, I know in Los Angeles they were looking at it on a flow regime perspective, and obviously where it's very heavy, there was a sense that you were going to increase flow. The question is at what level. I couldn't speak to that, but that was one of the big things that we were looking up at in the Angeles National Forest as well.
So I think that's all the questions, but I just want to remind everyone online, this is a great opportunity to bring your information forward, not only asking questions, but also educating those individuals that are working on this conceptual idea. This is how other projects will move forward in a positive way when you get this feedback early on with the people that are on the ground and know the little nuances of this particular system. So use that as an example to, it doesn't have to be a question. It could be just providing additional information. So go ahead, Dave. I think we can proceed. I don't think there's any other more questions right now.
All right. So we're on slide number 12 now, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Based on our initial review, the restoration of Aliso Creek would improve the natural ecosystem, riparian areas, and provide long-term resiliency and reduction in bank erosion. So we look at it and say, hey, if we could restore this, we have a degree of incision, we have a degree of instability, and we can provide a preliminary plan that is feasible to restore this and reduce the instabilities and provide longer term resiliency in the reach. And we can do that by looking at that smaller channel dimension as proposed by the mini regional curve that fits into the landscape just better. So it means we don't have to disturb as much existing vegetation. The bank full channel is less than a 2-year discharge, and that's significant in this analysis because a lot of documentation historically it said bankful discharges are between a 1.5 and 2 year discharge, and what the Corps of Engineers looked at is what the 2 year discharge was. But what we've seen through a lot of research from researchers that have passed away and been around for a while is that in urban environments, a lot of times these bankful channels have recurrence intervals even under a 1.1 year recurrence interval. So they're a very frequent discharge. We want to reconnect to the floodplains when it's available to do so and it meets the goals and objectives. We want native vegetation would be transplanted and be able to be reused as habitat. So wherever we have to disturb the native vegetation, we think we have ways that we can transplant the majority of that vegetation or reuse it in habitat features in the stream. So we don't expect to have to haul any wood off the site. We think we can reuse it all and make it beneficial reuse, if not transplanted. There's a minimum of 75 acres of wetland restoration and revegetation. And with bringing up the channel, we're going to have more frequency of flooding on those wetland features. So we are going to change the response at the mouth of Aliso Creek as well. And that is going to be data that we're going to have to incorporate into any design that we do as well. How much storage do we want on these floodplains? We think that there's a high potential for wetland restoration. And we do think that there's a lot of new habitat due to just raising this channel up in a higher elevation. So we look at this restoration and say that there's 5 to 6 miles of Aliso Creek, and the master plan hasn't been done yet, so we don't know what's the highest priority or what's not the highest priority. But if we just said, hey, could we restore all 5 to 6 miles of Aliso Creek, and is there enough reason to, we'd say, yeah, there's probably reason we could, and it's feasible that we could. And if we did, we'd probably reduce by a really rough number of 4,000 tons of sediment per year at the mouth of Aliso Creek. What we haven't evaluated is how beneficial is that reduction of sediment at the mouth of Aliso Creek. And those are all things that we have to start thinking about in the next phase of this project when we come to the master plan is, well, what really are our most important goals and objectives? What do we want this restoration to look like? What are the dominant processes that we're trying to push forward and start this stream back on this trajectory towards these dominant processes? So I'm going to move on to slide 13, but is there any questions or thoughts on slide 12 before I move on to slide 13?
I do have a question from Amber Baylor. Based on the slide of preliminary conclusions, which is what we're on right now, have you completed a preliminary evaluation of utilities in the area?
No, we, from a preliminary standpoint, I'd say we're even less than preliminary idea of utilities. We've taken notice to a couple utility crossings. We have some idea of where we have infrastructure ideas, but we haven't even gotten to the idea of looking at the elevations of utilities nearby. So that's definitely something that has to be incorporated into the concept design, and we have to spend more detail on there. What we did do in the preliminary level is we looked at certain key locations where we had utility crossings where they were noticeable, and we said, okay, well, here's a utility crossing. Can we bring the channel up above that, or will it have to be down below that? And would we have to move utilities for this design? And that's all the more that we've looked at, but it was not with a utility survey or former utility investigation.
I would add to that, Dave, that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's a lot of information. There should be plenty of information in there too about existing status of utilities. And then I am including in my response to Amber, I think this is another area where whatever data we may need to accompany what would have been included in the core study, which obviously needs to be updated. I know that SOCWA is initiating a project now on adjacent to the channel It would be really immensely helpful if we could integrate those data so that we have the most up-to-date information. So I've got another question. Oh, and then Amber said that she can share that. So thank you very much, Amber. And then Josie Bennett asked a question. Just wanted to confirm that the 4-stage urban channel design with a 30-foot bank full aligns with what we are seeing in our restoration sites after a render removal.
Perhaps Josie, you can clarify that. That's your observation that you are seeing something that aligns with that in these restoration sites, or is that a question?
That is correct. I just wanted to make that comment. Like you were saying, they don't have to be questions, but that definitely lines up with what we're seeing kind of naturally throughout the system. Not everywhere. There are definitely some areas where there's some real incision and things like that, but that's our overall observations. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Josie.
Yeah, that's great news, Josie. Thanks.
All right, I think we're good to move on, Dave.
All right, so slide number 13, we're talking about the key gaps and next steps for the concept design. And really what we're looking at in the concept design is a combination. Concept design has come out of this master plan idea. So we need to have a better idea of the prediction of how much sediment would be will be transported downstream, what the effects of that sediment will be in the reach as well as at the mouth of Aliso Creek. Look at grade control features, historic oxbows, look at the potential of reconnecting to oxbows in some locations, and then hydraulic and scour protection ideas for the overbank regions. What are some opportunities for us? What is the resistance of the existing floodplain features that would be reconnecting to? What's the existing vegetation? How much resistance can we get to deformation when we have an applied shear stress on there? So in other words, how much force can we place on those floodplains and not expect them to erode? We also want to look at, and so that all comes in through a predictive level assessment, and it's a geomorphic assessment for the design. It just essentially says, okay, well, what happens if we do nothing? And then if we do something, what's the preferred alternative for doing something, and what can we fix, and then what will it look like in a number of years afterwards if we do these remedies. Integration of flow ecology recommendations for the lower channel tier. This is really important because right now there has been little concern about the flow ecology on that lower channel, and there's a lot of places where the lowest channel is so spread out that you see subsurface flow during low flow periods. And we have a potential of creating a more consistent low flow channel that may be able to allow us to have more perennial ecology in these low flow regions, even if it's only in pools, than what there currently is. So the integration of that flow ecology and figuring out, okay, what is it that we want to try to do with this low flow channel, and what makes sense, opposed to just kind of dealing with a very wide low flow channel where we don't have much in the way of flow ecology because we can't have permanent wetted areas in the reach. And then the next one is the option for the removal of the major grade control structures, and what that could look like. So when we look at removing these big structures, that look like? What does the restoration after restoration looks like? And is that meeting goals and objectives related to flooding, also related to stability upstream, and related to infrastructure protection? Then current habitat mapping for the project and the impact and assessment areas. So really trying to get an idea of, in this area of disturbance, potential area of disturbance, as well as any new design, what is the different habitats that we have? Are we going to be preserving habitats, creating more habitat, transferring habitats from one type to another type? And is that really desirable as a stakeholder group, and with the best available science that we have in the region? Is it okay that we have a change in some habitat opposed to other places. We may want to preserve the existing habitat to a higher level. And then vegetation, landscape design, and utility and infrastructure assessment. So these are really some of the key gaps that we haven't gotten to yet in this real rough preliminary master plan document that we've put together. And the concept of this master plan was just to say, hey, there could be a smaller channel out there, and this smaller channel wouldn't have as big of an impact, and this is what it could look like. But there's a lot more that we have to get into that concept design. Any questions before I move on to slide 14?
No, we have one question that's kind of an overarching question when we get near to the end.
Okay, so we'll ask that after slide 14 here. So the master plan, the whole purpose of the master plan is to be able to start to get to a point where we're addressing some of these gaps. We're looking at design features, and we're looking at goals and objectives. We're looking at how much each one of these projects could cost if we're trying to optimize the goals and objectives and the achievement of each of the different objectives. And based on stakeholders' involvement, how much would this cost? And then what could the phasing look like? So would we be able to do reach 5 independently of reach 13? Or would we have to do reach 12 before we did reach 13? And what is the phase-in schedule for construction to make this optimal or just cost-effective or effective from an ecological standpoint? So if we have key species that are in a downstream reach, maybe we don't want to have them be affected by upstream construction, and you'd rather work in a way that you do construction upstream and then work your way downstream. So there's all sorts of reasons why we might change what phasing looks like on a project, but these concepts come out in the master plan. And this is where we start to lay it together. Okay, this is what reaches we have. This is how much we think it will cost. This is where we think grant money can come from. And if we have this much money, let's go here first and do this demonstration project, or let's go here first and do this project because it gets the best bang for the buck. And that's the whole content and purpose of a master plan. So we want to present a complete design concept spanning the entire reaches based on the stakeholders' involvement and an alternative analysis on each reach. So it may be that one reach we look at and say, hey, this four-stage natural channel design, this makes a lot of sense. We want to be doing this on this reach. There may be another place where we can connect to a floodplain and we want to do what's called a priority 1 restoration down in some of the lower reaches. And there may be other places where we can't really do a whole lot. We just need to armor and stabilize the banks as they are and hope that some vegetation can grow. And that's where the alternative analysis comes in, where we can look at different alternatives on a reach by reach basis, not on the entire reaches. So obviously there's going to be some reaches where we want to be able to do something closer to priority 1 restoration, other places where we just want to stabilize the banks, other places where we'll do a 4-stage channel design. It's to serve as a basis for developing a strategy for permitting, environmental review, and funding. And the master plan is this document that, what I like to tell people is master plan is a dream. A lot of times it's going to be wrong. You're going to look back and say, well, that was kind of silly, but it's a working process to be able to keep us moving. So without a dream, we have a hard time achieving something. So the master plan is really kind of this document that helps us dream of what this could be. We've seen some master plans where when people get done with the master plans, it looks almost exactly like what the master plan had laid out, and they may be at it 10, 20 years down the road and they've achieved it. There's other times where you look at a master plan and 20 years down the road, you're like, this is what this produced. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I've never seen a master plan that looks exactly like what was produced at any period down the road. So I've never seen one that's like, hey, we got it all right. That's exactly what we're going to do. So I think of a master plan as this professional, engineered document that helps us dream as stakeholders about what it could be, opposed to this professional engineer document that we can't ever vary from and we can't ever change. And I would say even in the 30% design, which comes after master plan, by reach, 60%, 90%, 100%, we're constantly going to be learning more from the scientific field. We're constantly going to be having more input from stakeholders, more landowners involved, and even our goals and objectives are going to be adjusting as we move through the process. And part of the master plan is laying out how they can adjust and a framework for the goals and objectives to adjust and how that will address the changes in a reach. So if you have 5 people that come to the stakeholders group and says, hey, we can't have that channel move an inch because of X, Y, and Z, then that's going to change the priority towards a restoration of a reach. So that's kind of what the concept of a master plan is, and that's how we see it. It's an engineered document that takes stakeholder involvement and helps us develop a dream. So do we want to address that final comment here?
Well, I think we've got, Darren, we have a slide with some questions about what folks would like to see. I think Mike's additional. Yeah, I think his question fits best there.
Perfect. Then we'll go ahead and move on to the, unless there's questions on the master plan concept and idea.
And as a reminder, anyone can raise their hands.
That's right.
And I can help unmute you if necessary. Otherwise, we can go to those prompts. I don't have any other questions.
All right, well, maybe we'll move to.
Great, yeah, so before we get to those prompts, we did want to just take a minute and kind of walk through the process that we envision. You know, we've already kind of seen this and discussed it, but you know, I think it's really great the way Dave laid out the idea of a dream and a vision of what the master plan can become. And we as a collaboration group have a great opportunity to be involved in the development of that dream. And so we've kind of put together this figure to help show how the technical team and the collaboration group interact together as this process of developing a project, developing a master plan, and then, you know, implementing it moves forward. And so you can see on the bottom the steps that the technical team will be working on through the process. And on the top, the opportunities for the collaboration group to be involved and in the ways that they get to help shape the development of this process. And so, you know, we've kind of spent a fair amount of time already discussing the different aspects that the technical team will be working on. You know, we're in that first box right now where there's been this initial field assessment, some kind of a design basis. The pre-master plan is kind of the vision that we're working towards. And so, you know, as we move forward in the process, the collaboration group has the opportunity to come in and really help use the desired outcomes that we've already developed as a group and shape the direction that the plan will be developed with, really bringing the insights that our group has, the desires that we've spent so much time really developing as a group and agreeing on that really are the ideal situations for Aliso Creek here. We can bring those and use that information to help shape that design perspective. And then identify opportunities and constraints. I think, you know, we've already started to hear a little bit of that during the call today. And as we move forward, you know, the hope and desire is for the collaboration group to continue to bring forward those opportunities and constraints that would shape that, and then what permitting expectations would look like. And then, you know, the technical team continues to take that information as we've discussed today, and it shapes into an actual master plan document, that dream that David talked about. And then from there, the collaboration group gets to continue to interact with thinking about how do we fund this? How do we phase this? How do we work through permitting, bringing in our local experience and our really insights that we have here within this watershed to develop a plan and to move this process forward. And so as the project gets developed, we want to make sure that we as a group are not just springing projects and bringing them out, after they've already been developed. The goal for the collaboration group is to really start early on in the process and to give the collaboration group opportunities to comment on the planning process. And so for this Aliso Creek restoration concept, we're very early on in the process here. And the technical team is bringing forward this idea of how the process could work. And at the end of that, there's the more defined project will be developed, and that's where we start to thinking about CEQA and really go through that process, developing additional technical studies as needed to flesh that out. So we just wanted to lay out a roadmap, kind of highlighting how the technical team and the collaboration group can work together to move through this process and leverage the expertise of both groups. So we'll
Great,
Darren?
Great, thank you, Avery, for that overview of the roadmap. That was great. So we put together a list of questions based on the information you received at the previous meeting in May, as well as this one, just to get some feedback and get you thinking about the kinds of questions that would be good to hear from, or answers that would be good to hear from you all. So for those people on the phone, I think I'll just really quickly read the questions if you're unable to see them. And again, this is just to get you thinking. We'd like to hear some feedback from as many of you as possible. So the first question is, what elements do you like about this approach? Are there other considerations you would like included? What are your thoughts on the next steps that we presented? If this process was to move forward, what information would you like to know next? How does this approach consider the concerns of the locally preferred plan? And how could this approach help achieve the desired outcomes identified through this process? So those are just some, you can certainly bring any questions or answers that you'd like to bring forward, but those are just to get you thinking about that. I don't know if we want to go ahead and start, go back to Mike's question at this point, or if we've got other questions already, Jenna.
Let's go to Mike's first, while some folks mull on it. So Mike had asked, what about recharging the degraded alluvial plain with recycled water to hydrate native vegetation for habitat recovery? That probably falls into the second item there.
Any thoughts on that idea? I'll certainly record that, Mike.
Yeah, we did a project like that years ago outside of Steamboat Springs, but it was really just for a groundwater infiltration gallery, and it served that purpose. I haven't been involved in any projects where that was the intent of the project. So definitely something to bring up in a master plan, a process. I like the concept of it. How feasible it might be would be something we'd have to look into related to energy expenditures.
This is Jennifer too. If I can just add, at some of our restoration sites, we've struggled a little bit with plant health with recycled water. So we'd have to look at the plant palette and possibly amending the soil. So it depends where it's at. So there, I imagine there's some studies out there, but I know we've seen some effects at a few of our sites. I think it's higher in salts, the recycled water. So depends on where the use would be in the plant palette.
Mike added that restoring the alluvial plain can earn funds for carbon sequestration. I don't see any other questions or comments from the group. Don't forget, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you.
Maybe we could hear from anyone that's willing to put forward. What elements did you like about the approach? maybe we could start with something simple there. Hopefully, I know there were some great ideas put out there, so let's hear what people liked about it. Anybody willing to come forward? I think we have one from
Oh,
Josie,
I have.
maybe.
Yep. There you go, Josie.
Hey everyone, thank you. So I'm kind of speaking again for folks that don't know me. I'm from the Laguna Canyon Foundation. And some of the things that I really appreciated about the approach that you guys are putting forward is kind of the quasi-stable segments and prioritizing things. You know, I think because there's been a lot of different efforts throughout the creek, you're going to find a lot of different vegetation that's moved in naturally or in our areas where we're actively restoring them. And so it's just one of those things where there's not an easy approach. It's definitely, I appreciate how much time and effort you guys are thinking about putting in just to develop a master plan. And I think that that's really the only way that I could see this successfully being done, mainly because it's why I kind of asked the question about the timing of the Arendo removal. What we've seen over the last 5 years is just this real just change in the whole system since that Arendo has been gone. And what we're seeing too is that a lot of the the native vegetation is moving in, and while we really love that and appreciate that, and that's what we're dedicated to doing, it's doing it before some of the hydrological issues have actually been addressed. And so now we have habitat that is being established in areas, and so just again kind of thinking about priorities in regards to how we're going to address the flow and the hydrological issues, but also balance that out with the wildlife that's there. So just kind of wanted to put that out. I think that it seems like it could be a really, really one of the only ways to do it. I think, putting together a master plan without really understanding what's going on, boots on the ground, is going to just get us to a design that's not going to actually be feasible. So, and then I just also wanted to mention in regards to kind of the considerations of this being the locally preferred plan versus kind of what the Army Corps had put forward. I think what really comes up for me is like updated vegetation mapping and wildlife mapping. So I remember that a lot of the design that was put forth by the Army Corps hadn't really taken into account the Arendo removal. And again, the system has changed dramatically. We have a lot more wildlife there. And so it's just, again, it's a really different system. And so filling in any of like the data gaps that are still on the ground, and then just understanding kind of the future needs for any other Arendo removal upstream, right? And maintenance kind of in that area and how that's going to affect things. So looking at the questions to see if there's anything else here. But yeah, no, I really appreciate the way that you laid everything out. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Josie. Any other questions, comments?
Mike Beenan added that ideally the project would not require extensive stream bank grading. Okay, I am not seeing other hands, so I think we can probably go on to the next item. But it would be good to get an idea of next steps for how and when this comes forward. Can anybody speak to that? Did we lose Dave?
I think Dave's there.
I'm still on the line here. Yeah, I mean, related to reducing the amount of stream bank grading that's occurring. Is that what you're looking for next steps on?
No, I'm sorry. In terms of when this comes back as a project and the next steps as we've laid them out, and maybe Jennifer can speak to this too, because she's kind of the project proponent for this right now. When does this next, how and when does this next come back to this group for, the continued discussion that we showed and the figure just before this feedback request line?
I can speak to this one. So right now it's our mitigation program that has funded bespoke mitigation partners and Five Smooth Stones to look at restoration opportunities. We're always looking for different opportunities throughout the county to do restoration for our mitigation obligations. And then there's also restoration components as part of our water quality improvement plan. So right now we just brought this forward as a very high level concept design, but in order to move it forward, it's going to depend partially on finding the funding. So if there's a project that we have a need for, and then we can hopefully, invest in the next step. We're also hoping through this process, the stakeholder process, to find out if there's other needs in the region or if there's other funding sources, and then we can partner up on a project, which is why it's really important to look at phasing and sequencing so we can understand, okay, if we can fund a certain portion of it and figure out priorities, maybe look at one section and see what we can improve at a time. So at this point, we just want to make sure we're hearing all the stakeholder feedback and we all pretty much agree on the same desired outcomes. So we're hoping to continue to get this feedback. And if you didn't speak up today at the meeting, we welcome you to email the technical team with any comments after the meeting. And we'll work to respond them and see how we can incorporate this and further develop a concept plan. So I think some of it's just going to be depend on when that funding becomes available to take the next step. So that would be further fleshing out a concept design, maybe starting to look at the veg mapping, the species mapping, the infrastructure mapping, and start to pull together some maps, and then eventually move through that roadmap that Avery laid out. So that's a lot of it does depend on funding, unfortunately, so if you guys are aware of other grant opportunities, bring that to the table as well too, please. Thank you.
Darren, I miss Amber has asked to be unmuted, so I am doing that now.
Excellent. Thank you. Amber, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Excellent presentation. I'm Amber Baylor. I'm the Director of Environmental Compliance for the South Orange County Wastewater Authority. We have, as well as some of our member agencies, have a significant amount of infrastructure in this area. So as far as stakeholder involvement and feedback, any phase of this moving forward, we would appreciate, a detailed mapping and resolution of the different, incisions of the creeks and those types of things that would occur based on your restoration plans. So as far as priorities, that's what we would advocate for. That's all, but great presentation.
Thank you, Amber. I was going to just reiterate what Jennifer just mentioned. You all have a PDF of the slides as well as these questions. So if it takes you a little bit of time to revisit that, we would love to get your feedback, written feedback, send that to the technical team. I guess that would probably go to Jenna or Andrew, and we could address those questions or at least get your feedback on some of the next steps and how they presented, what you liked about it, maybe what you didn't, if you want to include that as well. Any other questions, Jenna? If not, got 5 minutes left, so we could quickly move forward the rest. If not, we'll take more questions.
I don't see any more questions. And just to reiterate what you said, people can reach out to me if they'd like.
Great, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and go on to the next. We're going to take just a short little amount of time here for Avery to talk about discussing project concepts. And just kind of an overview of, because we're hoping this presentation and the way that this project was gave you an idea of how you could bring a project to one of your conceptual projects forward and get some feedback and some assistance or maybe some additional partners to work with you on your particular idea. So go ahead, Avery.
Great, thank you, Darren. Yeah, so we just have a couple minutes and we've shared these slides with you, so you can review this on your own as well. But did want to discuss the idea that, the purpose of the collaboration group is really to continue to bring forward projects that benefit Aliso Creek and bring them forward for these few objectives, really to leverage the knowledge of the group of stakeholders that come together at these meetings to identify potential barriers for projects and not only identify the barriers, but potential opportunities for overcoming those barriers. Really learn from others' experiences within the watershed and identify potential opportunities for collaboration. So if someone has a project idea that they're thinking about, they can bring it forward, and others are working in the watershed can think about ways that the project could be enhanced, provide additional benefits to the watershed, think about ways that the project could really be leveraged into something maybe bigger than they were initially thinking, and then identify opportunities for funding support. So various agencies could come together to enhance a project and to bring it forward, something that really provides even better benefits for the watershed. As they do that, as they enhance those opportunities, it really helps the projects prepare for grant funding. Hopefully we'll have a minute here or two for Jenna to discuss some of the funding opportunities that are coming up. But many of the funding opportunities that are coming forward are really looking for those multiple benefit projects that are not just focused on one single aspect of watershed enhancement, but look at achieving multiple benefits. And so really helps prepare those for that, identifies again, as we eliminate those barriers, it's going to help get those projects even more ready for grant funding. And then also look for the potential for programmatic options where we kind of combine projects or opportunities together in the permitting process. So we do hope that people will feel comfortable bringing projects or even just concepts, ideas forward. We don't need the projects to be fully fleshed out. They can be at any stage of the process. They can be something somebody's just thought of as they've been driving down the street and they see a situation, or it could be something that's been through the design process already and is quite far along, and they just want to bring it forward to get some more insights from the group. And so we can work with the organizing group to develop presentation material. And we can, similar to the way this process has gone for this concept, we can briefly present the project and the stakeholders will share their perspectives. And then we have a project list on the South Orange County IRWM hub site that lists all project opportunities. So that's where we use it to continue to store the information for later. And come back to as projects advance. I won't go over this slide just for the sake of time, but this just kind of shows how it could work for any project and then what a potential presentation could look like. So Jenna, do you want to take a minute or do we need to wrap up here, Darren?
Jenna, I'm going to throw it to you. I think you might actually have some questions maybe, or you answered those offline.
I answered that. We had some follow-up questions that I answered. Everyone should be able to see them in the Q&A. As soon as I respond, you can see that it pops up in the Q&A. Kay Havens agreed with Amber Baylor in the request for coordination with utilities early on and continuously through the process. So I sent a message on that. Mike Beaton clarified his earlier comment, so we have that noted. And then Susan Brodeur echoed earlier conversation about reduction in sediment delivery, but in particular noting that from the perspective of Aliso Beach, stability relies on sediment coming down through the watershed. So I noted that that's something that will be considered throughout the design. That kind of comes back to the dominant processes that Dave mentioned earlier. I can give a really quick update on the funding opportunities. This is certainly something I intend to come back to this group with. I know a lot of other folks are tracking this, but I do want to make a couple of points here. In particular, the governors may revise. I'm sure several, or if not most of you have heard about this. Yes, the budget moved through the process after the May revise. However, it's my understanding that the detail is really added in effectively rider bills that are currently being worked on through the state legislature that really adds the detail that we need to know how the state intends to spend the $5.1 billion allocated for climate resilience. And again, this also could entail moving funds from existing pools that have not yet been spent to be used for drought response. And none of that has been fully laid out yet. So, you know, through my interaction with colleagues across the state, I am making sure that if there's an update, hopefully that I'm in the chain to get it, to make sure that I relay that out to stakeholders. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on. If these funds do become available for projects similar to this, or other projects that we have listed on our project list throughout the watershed, we really need to keep our ears to the ground, because those funds, as it's laid out in the May revise, are only available for 1, maybe 2 years. It is intended to be funds to get out the door very quickly. The Prop 1 round 2 for the IRWM grant, that is intended to come out later this year and wrap into next year. DWR is reaching out to program leads regarding whether or not an application date in March or September of next year is ideal. As of right now, based on the way our governance structure is and the fact that some of these projects that we know we've been tracking have been delayed because of COVID, I'm looking at September probably being a better time frame for the application. But that does mean that the process likely starts the end of this year. So I do want to put a bug out that there's going to be approximately $3 million available for round 2. So make sure that if you've got a project in the queue, you are tracking that. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And then as I hear more about timing for OCTA Measure M, both tiers 1 and 2, I will let the group know. So that's the much abbreviated version.
Thank you, Jenna. I know we've started losing people already, and so we'll go ahead and just go to the last slide. As participants, I want to make sure we keep the group's momentum going. So these are the things that you can be working on, prepare for, and participate in any future meetings. We'll work on scheduling those. Review the reference guide. That was a lot of work went into that, and it's posted. There's the link for that. And then prepare and contribute your projects. That's one of the most important things of this group is bring those projects forward so that we can start to solve some of these issues in Aliso Creek. So thank you for your participation, and please send all feedback that you didn't get an opportunity to provide today directly to Jenna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Need anything from me, Jenna? Before I log out?
Jenna, I think you're muted.
Maybe she's done.
She could be
no,
done.
I was talking away.
I can't imagine if I
away.
asked you something that you would not say anything.
Oh no, just yammering on over here. Yeah, no, Susan Berder added something, so I was just responding to her.
Okay.
There's additional data that we can potentially get, looks like we can get from OC survey, kind of continued monitoring of the aqua structure. So that's good. We'll just make note of that. But other than that, nope, I think we're good to close out.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
everyone. Dan Tran, if you could email me the link and the attendee list at your earliest convenience, that'd be great.
Yep, we'll do as soon as it's done and I get that link, I'll send it over.